Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Maxwell Hart sat in his penthouse, staring out at the gleaming New York City skyline. The lights shimmered below, but he couldn't feel any warmth. At 35, he had everything: wealth, power, success, but it was all just a hollow shell. Since the death of his wife, the emptiness had swallowed him whole. He buried himself in work, making deals and growing his empire, but nothing could fill the void. The only thing that had kept him tethered to the world was the promise he made to her on her deathbed to ensure the legacy of their family. But even that felt like a weight dragging him down. His mother's old clock, the one that had been in their family for generations, stood on a shelf, frozen in time just like his life. It was a constant reminder that time, once lost, never returns. Maxwell's phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Claire Thompson, a young woman he'd met through his foundation. Claire wasn't like the women who usually surrounded him, gold diggers and socialites looking for status. No, Claire was different. She was kind, a little too kind for this world, and that's exactly what made her so intriguing. She was the one who had insisted on fixing his mother's old clock, saying that it deserved to be repaired, just like the past needed to be healed. Maxwell had refused at first, thinking it was just another gesture of charity, but something about the way she spoke about time had stayed with him. Today, she had reached out again. He sighed, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the clock. Maybe it was time for a change. Maybe it was time for her to fix more than just the clock. The next day, Claire walked into the grand lobby of Maxwell's building, nervously adjusting her coat. She had always felt a sense of awe when she entered the building, but today felt different. Today, she was not just here to fix a clock, she was here to meet Maxwell, a man who had become a symbol of everything she'd ever dreamed of: success, power, control. But Claire wasn't interested in that. She had already made a name for herself in her field, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Maxwell's cold, distant demeanor. Something that was broken inside of him. As she stepped into the elevator, her mind raced. She had agreed to meet him today, but now, standing in this towering building, she was second-guessing herself. What could she possibly say to him? Could she help him in the way she had hoped? Or was she just another person in his life, trying to fix things that could never be fixed? The elevator doors opened to his floor, and she was greeted by his assistant, who led her to his office. Maxwell stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the city. His profile was sharp, his jaw clenched as though he were battling with something deep inside. "You're here," he said, without turning around. His voice was deep, steady, but there was something in it, something raw. Claire stood there for a moment, taking in the man who had built an empire from nothing, the man who seemed like he had everything yet nothing at all. She had agreed to come here to fix a clock, but she didn't realize that she was about to fix something much bigger. "Yes, I'm here," she replied softly, taking a step closer. "I thought it was time to fix more than just the clock." She hesitated, unsure if she had said the right thing. Maxwell turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a flicker of something: curiosity? Hope? He didn't know. But for the first time in years, someone was seeing him, not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the man who had been lost in the shadow of his own grief. And somehow, it made him feel alive again. "I don't know if I'm ready to have my life fixed," he said quietly, his gaze softening. "But I think I could use a little help." Claire smiled, a faint glimmer of understanding passing between them. She wasn't here to fix him, she realized. She was here to help him heal. And maybe, just maybe, she could help him find his way back to life. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Maxwell Hart sat in his penthouse, staring out at the gleaming New York City skyline. The lights shimmered below, but he couldn't feel any warmth. At 35, he had everything: wealth, power, success, but it was all just a hollow shell. Since the death of his wife, the emptiness had swallowed him whole. He buried himself in work, making deals and growing his empire, but nothing could fill the void. The only thing that had kept him tethered to the world was the promise he made to her on her deathbed to ensure the legacy of their family. But even that felt like a weight dragging him down. His mother's old clock, the one that had been in their family for generations, stood on a shelf, frozen in time just like his life. It was a constant reminder that time, once lost, never returns. Maxwell's phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Claire Thompson, a young woman he'd met through his foundation. Claire wasn't like the women who usually surrounded him, gold diggers and socialites looking for status. No, Claire was different. She was kind, a little too kind for this world, and that's exactly what made her so intriguing. She was the one who had insisted on fixing his mother's old clock, saying that it deserved to be repaired, just like the past needed to be healed. Maxwell had refused at first, thinking it was just another gesture of charity, but something about the way she spoke about time had stayed with him. Today, she had reached out again. He sighed, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the clock. Maybe it was time for a change. Maybe it was time for her to fix more than just the clock. The next day, Claire walked into the grand lobby of Maxwell's building, nervously adjusting her coat. She had always felt a sense of awe when she entered the building, but today felt different. Today, she was not just here to fix a clock. She was here to meet Maxwell, a man who had become a symbol of everything she'd ever dreamed of: success, power, control. But Claire wasn't interested in that. She had already made a name for herself in her field, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Maxwell's cold, distant demeanor. Something that was broken inside of him. As she stepped into the elevator, her mind raced. She had agreed to meet him today, but now, standing in this towering building, she was second-guessing herself. What could she possibly say to him? Could she help him in the way she had hoped? Or was she just another person in his life, trying to fix things that could never be fixed? The elevator doors opened to his floor, and she was greeted by his assistant, who led her to his office. Maxwell stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the city. His profile was sharp, his jaw clenched as though he were battling with something deep inside. "You're here," he said, without turning around. His voice was deep, steady, but there was something in it, something raw. Claire stood there for a moment, taking in the man who had built an empire from nothing, the man who seemed like he had everything yet nothing at all. She had agreed to come here to fix a clock, but she didn't realize that she was about to fix something much bigger. "Yes, I'm here," she replied softly, taking a step closer. "I thought it was time to fix more than just the clock." She hesitated, unsure if she had said the right thing. Maxwell turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a flicker of something: curiosity? Hope? He didn't know. But for the first time in years, someone was seeing him, not the billionaire, not the CEO, but the man who had been lost in the shadow of his own grief. And somehow, it made him feel alive again. "I don't know if I'm ready to have my life fixed," he said quietly, his gaze softening. "But I think I could use a little help." Claire smiled, a faint glimmer of understanding passing between them. She wasn't here to fix him, she realized. She was here to help him heal. And maybe, just maybe, she could help him find his way back to life. The following week, Claire returned to Maxwell's office, though this time, she wasn't just here for the clock. The weight of what she had seen in him, the walls he had built around his heart, the grief he carried, the emptiness that consumed him still lingered in her thoughts. She hadn't expected to care this much. She had come to repair a clock, but now, she found herself wondering if she could help him repair his life too. Maxwell had become more than just a wealthy businessman in her eyes. He had become a man who needed saving, though he didn't know it yet. When she arrived at his office, the usual cold air of his penthouse hit her instantly. It was a space of polished floors, glass walls, and high-end furniture, a stark contrast to the man who sat behind a massive desk, surrounded by papers and corporate memos. Maxwell looked up from his work, his eyes tired, but when he saw her, a small spark of something flickered in his gaze. He had been expecting her, but he wasn't sure why he had agreed to another meeting. The first time, it had been business. This time, something else was pulling him in. "You're here again," Maxwell said, his voice calm, but it carried an undertone of surprise, as if he wasn't quite sure why he was allowing her into his space again. The vulnerability he'd shown last time when he admitted he needed help felt foreign to him, and yet it was a door he hadn't been able to close since she walked through it. Claire nodded, giving him a small smile. "I'm here to fix the clock," she said softly. She walked over to the shelf where it sat, the clock still frozen in time, a constant reminder of the man she had met. "But, I'm also here to help you," she added, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. She felt a little embarrassed as soon as she said it, but she didn't take it back. She could see the way the clock had affected him, his mother's clock, a piece of his past, and she knew that he needed something more than just the hands of a clock to move forward. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by her honesty. He hadn't asked for help. In fact, he had always prided himself on doing everything on his own. But something about Claire made him reconsider that stance. "Help me?" He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of his desk. "What exactly does that mean, Claire?" Claire hesitated for a moment. She had no script, no plan. She didn't have an answer for everything, but she knew what she felt, and it was real. "It means being here. Not just for the clock, but for you," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "I don't think you realize how much you've buried inside. The pain you carry, it's in everything you do." Maxwell's expression hardened for a moment, and he straightened in his chair. "I don't need anyone's pity, Claire," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I'm not some broken man you need to fix." His words were like walls being built higher, but Claire could see through them. She wasn't here to pity him, and he knew it. She could see that he was fighting something much deeper, something he didn't know how to face. But Claire wasn't backing down. She had seen this before: people who buried their pain, convinced themselves they didn't need help, and isolated themselves from the very thing that could save them: connection. "I'm not here to fix you, Maxwell," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I'm here because you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Maxwell stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Something in his chest tightened, a flicker of something deep inside him stirring. He wanted to push her away, to keep everything locked inside where it had always been safe. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of opening up didn't feel so terrifying. Maybe it was the clock, maybe it was her, or maybe it was the quiet ache inside him that was finally demanding to be heard. "I don't know if I can do this," Maxwell finally muttered, his voice quieter than before. "Let someone in. I've built my whole life around keeping things under control, keeping everything locked down tight." Claire stepped closer to him, her voice soft but resolute. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm not asking you to change overnight, but I think you deserve more than this. More than pretending everything's fine when it's not." Maxwell didn't know how to respond to that. For a moment, he simply stared at her, searching her face as if looking for anything that would prove her wrong. But the longer he looked at her, the more he realized that she wasn't like the others. She wasn't asking him to change for her or anyone else. She was just offering him a chance to be real. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What do you think I should do?" Claire smiled gently. "Start by letting yourself feel. Even just for a little while. Let the clock run again, Maxwell. Let it remind you that time doesn't have to be something you fight against." Maxwell nodded slowly, a decision forming in his mind. The clock had been frozen for years, just like him. Maybe it was time to let it start again. Claire turned and gently lifted the clock from the shelf, setting it on the desk. As she worked, Maxwell watched her, his mind racing with a mix of doubt and curiosity. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was a step in the right direction. And as the clock finally began to tick, Maxwell felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It had been a few weeks since Maxwell had allowed Claire to start fixing more than just the clock. Slowly, she had begun to work her way into his life, not just as a woman helping to repair his mother's heirloom, but as someone who seemed to see through the walls he had spent years building. And somehow, that scared him. Maxwell was not used to letting people in, especially not in the way Claire had done. She didn't pity him or try to fix him. She simply cared. And that, more than anything else, felt like a burden he hadn't expected. But a burden he was slowly learning to carry. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, Maxwell found himself walking to his penthouse, his mind fogged with the usual frustrations. The cold wind outside seemed to match the chill in his heart. But then, as he entered the lobby, he noticed something different. Claire was there, standing near the elevator, her smile warm and genuine as always. She wasn't dressed in her usual work attire, but in something more casual, a soft sweater and jeans. It struck him how out of place she seemed in this grand building, like she was a part of his world yet not quite belonging to it. And for some reason, it made her all the more endearing. "You're here," Maxwell said, his voice quieter than usual, as he approached her. His eyes scanned her, taking in her presence. It had been a while since they'd shared a simple moment like this. No clock, no repairs, just the two of them. Claire smiled up at him, her eyes bright. "I thought I'd bring you dinner," she said, holding up a small bag from a local deli. "Something simple. You've been working non-stop, and you barely take care of yourself." Maxwell hesitated, his instinct telling him to decline. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness, not from someone like Claire, but before he could respond, Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. "Come on," she urged, "it'll be a nice break. Just for a moment. Let's sit down and eat. I promise I won't take up too much of your time." Something in her tone softened him, and Maxwell found himself nodding, surprising even himself. He didn't know why, but he trusted her in a way he hadn't trusted anyone in years. And so, they sat together in his penthouse, eating takeout on the couch. The silence between them was comfortable, unlike the tension he usually felt when he was around others. For once, he allowed himself to just exist in the moment, not thinking about his empire or the legacy he was so desperate to preserve. He found himself asking her questions, things he hadn't really thought about before. Questions about her life, her dreams, and the way she saw the world. As they ate, Maxwell couldn't help but notice the way Claire spoke. Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made him want to know more. She didn't talk about business or success, she talked about passions, about the little things that mattered in life. It was something Maxwell had long since stopped caring about. He had buried all that under the weight of his responsibilities. But tonight, listening to her, he realized just how much he had lost. "What's the one thing you dream of doing, Claire?" Maxwell asked, his voice softer now. He had never asked anyone that before. No one had ever asked him either. But there was something about her, about the way she lived with such a quiet authenticity, that made him want to know. Claire paused, her eyes thoughtful. "I dream of opening a community art studio. A place where people can come together and create. I think the world needs more places like that, places where people can find peace in something as simple as painting or sculpting. Art can heal, you know?" Maxwell looked at her, intrigued. "You believe that?" She nodded, her smile gentle. "I do. It's not about the end result. It's about the process. The act of creating something, no matter how small, can be a form of healing. And everyone deserves that chance." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know it then, but that small moment would stay with him for a long time. Maxwell had spent his life focused on building an empire, on creating something tangible, but Claire was telling him that the real value wasn't in what you built, it was in how you lived while building it. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt something stir inside him, a longing for something more. Something beyond wealth or success. He realized he had been chasing the wrong thing. And that night, as Claire shared her dreams with him, Maxwell found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he had been running from what he truly needed all along. After dinner, Claire stood up to leave, but before she did, she turned to Maxwell, her expression serious. "Maxwell," she said softly, "I know you're not used to letting people in, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm not going anywhere." Maxwell looked at her, his chest tight. He didn't know how to respond. But the truth was, he didn't need to say anything. Her words were enough. They were all he needed to hear. As Claire left, Maxwell stood by the window, looking out at the city below. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he didn't want to face it alone. Maxwell stood by the window, looking out over the city as Claire's words echoed in his mind. "I'm not going anywhere." It had been days since their dinner together, and he found himself replaying that simple sentence over and over again. The quiet understanding in her voice had struck a chord in him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to bear the weight of everything alone. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't sure he was ready to embrace, but it was there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The days that followed were filled with small, subtle changes. Claire continued to visit Maxwell's office, not just to work on the clock but to simply spend time with him. It wasn't anything grand or extravagant. They would talk about life, about art, about things that didn't involve business or numbers. Maxwell found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the way she made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. One afternoon, Maxwell sat in his office, reviewing a report when Claire knocked softly on the door and entered, a small package in her hands. "I thought you might like this," she said, handing him the wrapped gift. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, surprised by the gesture. "What's this?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Claire smiled, her eyes warm. "It's a small painting. I thought it might brighten up your office a bit." She paused, then added, "I know how much you like the idea of art being something that heals." Maxwell hesitated before slowly unwrapping the package. Inside, there was a simple painting, a landscape, soft and muted in colors, of a quiet park with trees swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't a masterpiece, but there was something calming about it. For the first time in a long while, he felt a small weight lift from his shoulders as he looked at it. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, looking up at Claire. His voice was softer than usual, and for a moment, they just stood there, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Claire smiled, watching him. "I thought you might like something peaceful. A little reminder that there's more to life than work. You know, sometimes we get so caught up in everything, we forget to just breathe." Maxwell nodded slowly, her words hitting a little too close to home. She was right. He had spent so much time focused on building his empire, on pushing himself to be the best, that he had forgotten how to enjoy the simpler things in life. Art. Peace. Connection. These things seemed so foreign to him now, yet standing here with Claire, they felt like the missing pieces of something he had lost long ago. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "This means more than you know." Claire's smile softened. "I'm glad you like it. It's just a little something to remind you that life isn't just about what you can accomplish. It's also about what you can appreciate." Maxwell looked down at the painting again, the calm landscape now feeling like a metaphor for everything he had been missing. He didn't know why he had never allowed himself to see life this way before, but suddenly, it felt like a revelation. It was as if Claire had unlocked a part of him that he had buried for too long. A part of him that still longed for the simplicity and peace that came with just being present in the moment. "I think I've been so focused on being strong," Maxwell said after a long pause, his voice softer than usual, "that I forgot what it meant to feel. To really feel anything." Claire stepped closer, her gaze gentle. You don't have to be strong all the time, Maxwell. You don't have to carry everything on your own. It's okay to let go sometimes. For a moment, Maxwell just stood there, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always thought strength meant keeping everything together, staying in control. But Claire was right. Maybe true strength wasn't about controlling everything. Maybe it was about letting go, about allowing himself to be vulnerable. As if reading his thoughts, Claire gave him a small smile. You've got nothing to prove to anyone. Not to me, not to anyone else. You're allowed to let your guard down. You deserve peace. Maxwell didn't respond right away. He just stood there, taking in her words. For the first time in years, he felt like he was starting to understand what it meant to truly heal. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to try. Ready to open up to the possibility that life could be about more than just success and power. It could be about connection. It could be about love. And it could be about letting someone in. After a long pause, Maxwell finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. I think I'm starting to understand that now. Claire nodded, her expression warm with understanding. That's all anyone can ask for, Maxwell. Just take it one step at a time. As the day went on, Maxwell found himself thinking about everything Claire had said. About how he had spent so many years running from his emotions, from the pain of losing his wife, from the fear of opening up to someone again. But maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face those fears, to allow himself to feel again. And as the evening came, Maxwell sat by the window, looking out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he was truly living. And it was all because of Claire. The following days passed quietly, with Maxwell continuing to find comfort in the small moments he shared with Claire. The painting she had given him remained on his desk, a constant reminder of the peacefulness he had long forgotten. He found himself looking at it during long meetings or late nights working alone, its tranquil landscape giving him a sense of calm he hadn't known he needed. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt like he was finally reconnecting with life, not just with his business but with the person he used to be before the weight of loss and duty consumed him. Claire continued to visit him, not just to fix the clock but to talk, to share small moments that seemed to build something stronger between them. Their conversations were simple, but they were also deep. He began to open up more, talking about his past, his struggles, and even his fears. And as the days went on, he realized just how much he had been keeping locked inside. One afternoon, as Claire was leaving his office, she turned to him with a hesitant expression. Maxwell, she began, her voice soft, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What's that? He asked. Claire hesitated, then took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I know this might sound strange, she said slowly, but would you ever consider joining me in a project I've been working on? It's not about fixing things, not about clocks or repairs, it's something more. Something personal. Maxwell was taken aback. What kind of project? He asked, unsure of what she meant. Claire smiled faintly, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. I'm planning to open an art studio. Not just for people to learn how to paint, but as a space where people can heal. A place where anyone can come and just create. You know, a kind of sanctuary where people can reconnect with themselves through art, just like you've started reconnecting with life. I want it to be a safe place for healing. She paused, searching his face for a response. Maxwell sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the armrest. He hadn't expected this. An art studio, a place for healing. The idea seemed far removed from the corporate world he lived in, yet somehow, it felt right. He looked at Claire, studying her expression. She wasn't asking for money, or for a business partnership, she was simply asking for his support. For a moment, he felt a pang of uncertainty. He wasn't the kind of person who usually invested in things that didn't have a direct financial gain. But something about Claire's sincerity, her vision of what this studio could be, touched him deeply. He had spent so much of his life focused on numbers, on building something that could stand the test of time. But maybe this was a chance for him to build something different, something that could heal, something that could matter in a way that wealth and success never had. I don't know much about art, Maxwell said, his voice thoughtful, but I do know what it feels like to be broken. To be stuck. And I know how hard it is to find a way out of that darkness. Claire's smile widened as she stepped closer. Exactly. That's why I need you. I think you can help people see that they don't have to stay stuck, that they can move forward, just like you've been doing. Maxwell paused, his mind racing. He thought about everything Claire had taught him about feeling, about opening up, about healing. He thought about the way he had started to change, the way he had started to feel alive again. And maybe, just maybe, this was the next step. Helping others, giving them a chance to heal as he had. He hadn't realized it before, but he was ready. All right, he said, his voice firm but with a new sense of resolve. I'm in. I'll help you. Let's do it. Claire's eyes sparkled with excitement. Really? She asked, her voice filled with surprise and joy. Maxwell nodded. Yes. I don't know exactly what this will look like, but I believe in what you're doing. I believe in you. Claire stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Thank you, Maxwell. You don't know how much this means to me. As she left his office that afternoon, Maxwell sat back in his chair, a sense of peace settling over him. It wasn't just the decision to help Claire with her project, it was the feeling of finally doing something for others, something that could make a real difference. He had spent so much of his life trying to fix what was broken in him, trying to keep control of everything around him. But now, for the first time, he realized that healing wasn't about control. It was about connection. And with Claire by his side, he felt like he had finally found the connection he had been missing all along. Maxwell's life began to shift in ways he had never anticipated. Over the next few weeks, he found himself deeply involved in Claire's project. What started as a small, casual offer to help turned into something much bigger. He spent his days in meetings with contractors, overseeing plans for the art studio, while his nights were filled with quiet moments with Claire, discussing the studio's mission and vision. He found himself growing more and more invested in the idea, not just as a businessman but as someone who believed in the power of healing, in the way art could bring people together and help them move past their pain. One afternoon, as they sat in the studio space still empty but filled with potential, Maxwell glanced over at Claire. She was examining a set of blueprints, her brow furrowed as she thought. There was something about the way she approached everything with such purpose and passion that left him in awe. He had always admired people who could see the world not for what it was but for what it could be. And Claire, in her quiet way, had the ability to do just that. You're doing something incredible here, Claire, Maxwell said, his voice steady but filled with appreciation. I didn't realize how much of an impact this could have on people until I saw it for myself. Claire looked up, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. You've been a huge part of this, Maxwell, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Without your support, none of this would be possible. She paused, and for a moment, there was a silence between them, one filled with unspoken understanding. Maxwell didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being praised for something that didn't involve his business acumen or success. But with Claire, it felt different. She wasn't just thanking him for his money or resources, she was thanking him for his heart. And for the first time, Maxwell realized that he had something worth offering beyond his wealth. He had the ability to give back in a way that truly mattered. As they stood up to leave the studio for the day, Claire turned to him with a thoughtful expression. Maxwell, she began, her voice softer than usual, there's something I need to tell you. Something important. Maxwell stopped, his curiosity piqued. What is it? Claire took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. I think I'm starting to see something in you that's been there all along. Something you didn't realize was still there. She paused, giving him a moment to process her words. I know you've been through a lot, and I know it's hard for you to let people in, but I think you're ready. Ready for more than just the studio, more than just work. I think you're ready for something deeper, something more personal. Maxwell's heart skipped a beat as he listened to her words. He had been so focused on the idea of healing others, of helping Claire with the studio, that he hadn't allowed himself to think about his own personal healing. But Claire was right. He had started to change. And that change wasn't just about opening up to her, it was about opening up to himself, about allowing himself to feel things he had long buried. I've never been good at this, Maxwell said quietly, his voice uncertain. I've always kept my emotions in check. Always thought I had to do everything on my own. But I think I'm beginning to understand what you mean. Claire stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. It's okay, Maxwell. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. All you have to do is trust that you're not alone anymore. Maxwell looked down at her hand, his mind racing. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, afraid of letting anyone see the vulnerability beneath. But with Claire, it felt different. For the first time, he felt like he didn't have to carry everything by himself. Maybe he didn't need to be perfect. Maybe he just needed to be real. I trust you, Claire, Maxwell said softly, his voice almost a whisper. I never thought I could, but I do. And I'm starting to think, maybe I don't have to do everything alone. Claire smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. That's all I've ever wanted to hear, Maxwell. They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared words hanging in the air, before Maxwell took a deep breath, feeling the first true sense of peace he had known in years. As they left the studio together, he realized that he wasn't just healing others through the art studio, was healing himself. And with Claire by his side, he knew he was finally on the path to a future where he didn't have to face it alone. Weeks passed, and the art studio began to take shape. Maxwell threw himself into the project with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He found himself spending long hours at the site, working alongside Claire to turn the vision into reality. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar, it was about creating a space that could truly help people heal. The building was transforming, and so was Maxwell. His heart, once closed off, was starting to open in ways he never expected. One evening, after a long day of planning, Maxwell sat in the nearly finished studio. The walls were painted a soft, inviting color, and the space had begun to feel alive. Claire walked in, her eyes bright as always, her presence bringing a sense of warmth to the room. She looked at Maxwell, who was staring out at the city beyond the windows. It was quiet, peaceful, the calm before the storm of opening day. Maxwell, Claire said, her voice soft, you've done something incredible here. This place, it's more than just a studio. It's a sanctuary. A place for people to heal, to start over. Maxwell turned to look at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. We've done it, he said quietly. I never thought I'd be a part of something like this. I spent so much time building things that could be measured: numbers, success, wealth. But this is different. This feels real. Claire smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. It's because you let yourself be a part of it. You didn't just write a check or make business decisions. You put your heart into this. And that's what makes it special. Maxwell felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had never realized how much he had been missing out on by staying emotionally distant. He had always been so focused on building his empire, thinking that success and control were what mattered most. But now, as he stood in the studio, he realized that true fulfillment came from something far deeper. It came from connection. From giving. From sharing your life with others. As the days drew closer to the grand opening of the studio, Maxwell's heart became heavier. Despite the excitement of the project's success, he began to realize that there was something else weighing on him, something he hadn't been ready to face until now. His feelings for Claire had grown stronger, deeper. It wasn't just about the work anymore, it was about her. And that scared him. Maxwell had never been good at vulnerability, especially when it came to matters of the heart. He had been burned before, and he had promised himself he would never let anyone get close enough to hurt him again. But with Claire, it felt different. There was a trust between them now, a bond that went beyond the studio or the work they had done together. One evening, as they were leaving the studio, Maxwell turned to her, his heart racing. "Claire," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I need to talk to you about something." Claire stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "What is it?" Her tone was calm, but there was a knowing in her eyes. She had seen the shift in him, felt the change in the air between them. Maxwell took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I don't know how to say this, but I think I've fallen for you. And it scares the hell out of me." Claire's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was a silence between them, a silence filled with unspoken understanding. Then, she stepped forward, placing her hand gently on his chest. "Maxwell," she said, her voice tender, "I've been falling for you, too. And you don't have to be scared. Not with me. We've been through so much together, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Maxwell's breath caught in his throat as he looked into her eyes. For the first time, he felt like he didn't need to hide. He didn't need to be the perfect, untouchable man that he had tried to be for so long. With Claire, he could just be himself, flawed, vulnerable, and ready to open his heart to the possibility of love. As he looked at her, he knew that this was it. This was the moment that would change everything. The studio, the healing, their connection, everything had led him to this point. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He was ready. Maxwell reached out, gently taking Claire's hand in his, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm ready, too," he said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "Let's do this. Together." And as they stood there, hand in hand, Maxwell knew that this was the beginning of something beautiful, something far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The grand opening of the studio arrived faster than Maxwell expected. The space was filled with warm light, the soft hum of people talking, and the gentle sounds of music playing in the background. The walls, adorned with paintings and sculptures created by local artists, gave the space a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere. It was everything Claire had dreamed of, and Maxwell, standing beside her, felt a deep sense of pride. It wasn't just the success of the project that moved him, it was the sense of purpose he had found in this journey. The studio had become a symbol of change, not just for others, but for him as well. As guests filtered in, Maxwell couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness. His gaze constantly drifted to Claire, who was speaking with some of the visitors, her face glowing with happiness. She had worked tirelessly to bring this dream to life, and now, it was finally happening. The moment was almost surreal to him. Just months ago, he had been a man disconnected from everything, buried in work and grief. But now, standing here with Claire, he realized how far he had come. The evening went on with laughter, shared stories, and the quiet hum of new connections being made. Maxwell found himself speaking with people he would have normally brushed off, but this time, it felt different. He listened with genuine interest, his conversations flowing easily as he connected with others in a way he never had before. For the first time in years, he wasn't consumed by his company or the pressure of maintaining his empire. He was simply present. Later in the evening, Claire approached him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I can't believe this is happening," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "This is exactly what I've always dreamed of." Maxwell smiled, his heart swelling as he looked at her. "You did this, Claire. You created something incredible, something that will make a real difference." Claire's eyes softened as she stepped closer. "We did this, Maxwell. You were with me every step of the way. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible." Maxwell's chest tightened as he looked at her, his feelings for her stronger than ever. He had never imagined a future like this one where he was truly living, truly connected to someone. He had spent so much of his life running away from vulnerability, from emotions, but with Claire, he realized how much he had been missing. He hadn't just helped her build the studio. She had helped him rebuild his life. As the night went on, Maxwell and Claire found themselves alone in the studio, surrounded by the quiet hum of the event still taking place in the next room. Claire was standing near the window, looking out at the city lights. Maxwell walked over and stood beside her, taking a moment to appreciate how far they had come. "This place," Maxwell said quietly, "it's everything you wanted. It's everything you deserve." Claire turned to him, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's everything we've worked for. I couldn't have done this without you. I couldn't have done anything without you." She paused, her expression softening. "Maxwell. I never thought I would find someone who truly understands me. Someone who believes in this as much as I do." Maxwell looked at her, his heart racing. He had never felt more certain about anything in his life. "I'm right here, Claire," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." As he took her hand in his, the weight of everything they had been through, the struggles, the changes, the growth, seemed to melt away. In that moment, it was just the two of them, standing together in the studio that had come to represent so much more than art. It was a place of healing, of love, of new beginnings. And as the evening wound down and the last guests began to leave, Maxwell and Claire shared a quiet moment alone, their hands intertwined. He knew that this was just the beginning of the studio, of their lives, of everything they could build together. For the first time, Maxwell wasn't looking ahead with fear or doubt. He was looking ahead with hope, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Months passed, and the studio continued to thrive. Maxwell and Claire's partnership had grown stronger, not just in business but in their personal lives as well. They spent their days working together, bringing new ideas to life, and their evenings shared with quiet moments of reflection and connection. The studio had become a sanctuary not only for the people who came to heal but also for Maxwell, who had found something more valuable than success: love, trust, and a sense of purpose that went beyond wealth. One crisp morning, as the sun streamed through the windows of the studio, Maxwell stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once felt so cold and distant. He had a coffee in his hand, and his gaze was steady, no longer clouded by the uncertainty he had once felt. The city, like him, had changed. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about the people, the connections, and the relationships he had built. Claire entered the room, her steps light and purposeful. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes filled with warmth. "Good morning," she said, walking over to him. "How's the day looking?" Maxwell turned to face her, his smile soft but genuine. "It's looking good," he replied. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything we've built, and how far we've come." Claire stopped in her tracks, her eyes searching his face. She could see the change in him. It wasn't just about the studio or the work they had done together, it was about the man he had become. He was no longer the emotionally distant billionaire he once was. He had found something more precious: the ability to feel, to love, and to be truly present. "You know," Maxwell continued, "I never thought I'd find happiness again. I thought I was too broken for that. But here I am. And I owe so much of that to you, Claire." Claire's smile deepened, and she stepped closer, her heart swelling with affection. "I'm just glad you let me in, Maxwell. You've always had this incredible potential, but it was hidden behind all those walls. I'm just happy I got to see the real you." Maxwell's heart felt full as he looked at her. He had never thought he would be able to trust anyone again, not after everything he had lost. But Claire had shown him that it wasn't about perfection or control. It was about vulnerability, about allowing someone in, and about trusting in love again. "I didn't know what it meant to really live until I met you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've given me the greatest gift I could ever ask for: the chance to rebuild not just my life but my heart." Claire's eyes softened as she reached out and took his hand. "And you've given me so much in return, Maxwell. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You're more than just a partner to me. You're my family." Maxwell looked at their hands, intertwined. The weight of everything they had been through, everything they had built, settled over him like a comforting embrace. This wasn't just a business venture, it was a journey they had taken together, a journey that had healed both of them in ways they never expected. As Claire leaned in, Maxwell pulled her gently into an embrace. He held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. This was his family now. This was his home. "You're not alone anymore, Maxwell," Claire whispered softly, her voice barely above a breath. "We're in this together, always." Maxwell closed his eyes, taking in the moment, feeling the peace he had longed for. He had spent so much of his life building empires, chasing dreams that seemed so important at the time. But now, standing here, with Claire by his side, he realized that the most valuable thing he had ever built wasn't a business or a legacy, it was the love they had found, the life they had created together. "Together," Maxwell repeated, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "Always." And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Maxwell knew that this was just the beginning. They had built something beautiful, something lasting, and they were ready to face whatever the future held together.